Hi, this is Dr. MJ coming to you from beautiful Boston, Massachusetts. This is the Women in Dentistry podcast, where we feature women in dentistry making waves and leading the industry through the next decade. I am your host, Dr. Mary Jane Hanlon, a former dental assistant, dental hygienist, and now dentist. I'm very pleased to introduce you today to Dr. Natanya Marracino Brown. Dr. Brown received her DMD degree from Tufts University School of Dental Medicine in 2005, followed by a GPR at Harvard School of Dental Medicine and Brigham and Women's Hospital. She then completed an endodontic residency at the University of Illinois at Chicago College of Dentistry in 2009 and is a board certified by the American Board of Endodontics. Natanya has been practicing endodontics in San Francisco since 2009, both as an associate and as a practice owner. She has also volunteered in the Department of Endodontics at UCSF School of Dentistry. Natanya is a certified life and weight loss coach with training from the Life Coach School. While being passionate about saving people's teeth, she is also passionate about helping other dentists live their best lives at their ideal weight. Having been raised in Spain and Puerto Rico, Natanya is fluent in Spanish and pre-COVID enjoyed international travel. She's a huge fan of tennis, and when she isn't working, she can be found on the tennis courts practicing her topspin forehand. She lives in San Francisco with her husband and 2 sons. It is now my pleasure to bring you to my interview with Natanya Brown. Natanya, I am so excited to bring you to the show today. Thank you so much for spending your time with us, and we really can't wait to hear more about your story. So tell us in your little history of how you got involved in dentistry, and let's get the show going. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button to our channel, and also don't forget to hit the bell so you never miss out on a single episode. Thanks so much.
Mary Jane, thank you so much. I'm really thrilled to be here. I feel very honored to have been invited on. Yeah, I grew up abroad in Spain and in Puerto Rico. I grew up with my parents, of course, and my sister. And after graduating high school in Puerto Rico, I went to Tufts for college. And little did I know when I started college at Tufts that I would actually continue on to dental school there. So I feel really fortunate to have had the opportunity to stay in Boston. Of course, as an undergraduate, I lived out in Medford and Somerville, and then in dental school, I got to move, downtown, which was pretty exciting.
So you're a double jumbo.
I am a double jumbo. That's right.
Very cool.
Yeah. And so, having lived in different places, I think I developed an appreciation for different cultures. Spanish was my first language, and then I always went to school in English. So English did become my dominant language. But to this day, I still very much appreciate, international travel. Of course, when there isn't COVID happening.
I miss my travel. I can tell you that.
Yes, I think we all do.
Well, how did you get interested in dentistry? If you came to Somerville and entered Tufts without that intention, what drew you to the profession?
Yeah. So in college, initially, I thought I was going to follow my sister's footsteps and go into medicine. I ended up actually transferring from the College of Liberal Arts into the College of Engineering very early on in my undergraduate career, which was pretty rare. Mostly people transfer out of the College of Engineering. And so I was one of very few females at the time. Certainly nothing like, many years ago, for instance, like when Dr. Esther Wilkins went through dental school, for example. But I do certainly remember being in large classes and being one of maybe a handful at best of the women in the class. And I will never forget, actually, Dean Knox was female dean of engineering at Tufts when I was going through, and she was a true inspiration and really gave me a fantastic pep talk as I was going through the program. There was a point that, I wasn't sure to consider civil engineering or electrical engineering, or I ended up going with biomedical engineering for my college degree, but she was just a real source of inspiration. And my sister actually was the one that got me interested. As I mentioned before, she ended up really, even though I thought I was going to follow her footsteps, she ended up really piquing my interest because I spent a summer with her between my junior and senior year of college. And she just said, have you ever considered dentistry? And of course, at that point, I was thinking I was going to continue on with engineering, or perhaps I was still open to a medical profession. Even I was considering becoming a veterinarian or a physician. But when my sister started talking to me about dentistry, she said that she had many friends that were in dental school that were very happy. And so I decided to, as with anything in life, it's all a leap of faith. But I said, I don't really know a lot about dentistry, but at a minimum, I know I can take the next step. I can apply and I can be learning about it as I go. And so I just decided to go for it. And it was a fantastic decision.
And you graduated 2005, I think you said?
2005, that's right. So I went straight from graduating college at Tufts. I went straight in that following fall to Tufts Dental. And it was the best decision I ever made.
Yeah, it's a great school. It's a great school. It's a great family. I do believe that we feel very much like a huge family across the world because we have graduates coming from, everywhere across the world. And it's just nice to see that camaraderie and that feeling of warmth whenever you meet somebody that, right away I connected with you because we're both Tufts graduates, right? So it's a nice thing to have. And so then you went from directly to a GPR, correct?
Exactly. So after finishing at Tufts Dental, I went into a GPR at Harvard Brigham and Women's. I don't know if they still have more than one GPR, but at the time they were running two different GPRs. And that was a phenomenal experience as well. I truly learned an inordinate amount, through OR cases and through like the rotations that I did through anesthesia, as well as MGH and through the Cambridge Health Alliance. So they really rotated us through some really amazing places where we could just really learn quite a lot.
And is that when you decided to go into endodontics?
Yes. And so I think throughout every stage, I've had some amazing mentors. I was already interested in endo in dental school, although certainly, I wasn't positive if I wanted to specialize, but both Dr. Rankin and Dr. Amato left a really great impression with me. In my opinion, they made it really fun. I think endo at a pre-clin level can be really tough and it's, kind of abstract and you don't really understand exactly what's going on and you can't see everything. And then you have to take all these x-rays. And so at some point during my GPR, I realized just how gratifying it is to be able to get people out of pain. It's very tangible. And so I decided that's the area that I wanted to specialize in.
Very good. Very good. So you went to Tufts and then you went on to Chicago?
Yes. So I practiced for a year as a general dentist in Brighton. And then after that, my husband and I moved out to Chicago. So I was very fortunate when I applied to endo programs that I had a few options. And so we chose to go to Chicago, and my husband simultaneously was getting an MBA at the University of Chicago. And so that worked out perfectly because we were both in 2-year programs and we couldn't have planned it any better.
That's perfect. Now, how did you end up in California? So it seems like you've gone all the way kind of around the United States in your journey. So how did you end up in California?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And I often tell people that, from Puerto Rico, I went to Boston, and then my husband and I worked our way out west, and then that's it. There's no more stops on the bus. Like, we're done.
So we say sometimes.
We say, that's right. Plans are futile, right? None of us really know what the future holds. But so my sister, she moved out to California to go to medical school, Southern California, and she's stayed there ever since. And so even as I was applying to college, she's several years older than me. So she was already in medical school when I was in college. And I had considered moving to California even when I was applying to college. So For some reason, I was just always intrigued by Northern California, and my husband is in the tech industry. And so certainly the Bay Area is really a hub for that. And so San Francisco was really just a natural fit as far as really everything we were looking for. And I've been very fortunate that my parents have then also relocated to California. So now we're all in the same time zone in the same state.
That's awesome. There's nothing better than that, especially as a fairly new grandmother. I can say that I would be devastated if my daughter was someplace else where I wasn't, right? I just can't imagine not being so close to my grandchildren as they grow up, because it's such a short, very quick amount of time.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I don't take that for granted for one moment, because I have lived many years of my life far away from my family. And so it's really something that I don't take for granted now at all.
That's amazing. Good for you. So now you're in private practice and you have your own practice and you work for another practice. Is that correct? Or are you now just full?
So I have worked in a lot of different capacities throughout my 11 years in San Francisco. And so I was an associate in a few different endodontic practices for many years. I then did buy my own endodontic practice. It's been several years now. And approximately 3 years, I actually chose to sell. So I'm back to being an associate, and that's worked out quite well. I think when it comes to practicing and finding really the right situation or practice structure, it's really quite variable. And I think that, when I moved out to San Francisco, my husband and I moved out to San Francisco, we moved out at an interesting time because it was 2009. And of course, the economy was not so great. And perhaps there may be some parallels then to how it is now for recent graduates. I'm not sure. But certainly with the economy not being so great, initially it was quite tricky to find an associateship when we moved out here. And so I was really committed to making it work no matter the distance that I needed to drive. And I think for many recent graduates, at least in certain urban areas, they can piece together working at different offices as best as possible. And you do whatever you need to do to make it work. And so that's really what I did for several years. Finally, I had the opportunity to own my own practice, which I did for about 2.5 years. And the timing of that was interesting because just as I was signing the paperwork to purchase the practice, shortly thereafter, I learned I was pregnant with my second son. And throughout the time of owning the practice, I did a lot of soul searching to figure out whether location wise it was going to be the best fit, and whether that practice model of like me being a sole owner was really going to work. So I toyed with a lot of different options as far as bringing on an associate, but ultimately I did decide to sell the practice and go back to being an associate, which has worked out really well.
So, I'm curious because, we as women talk about this all the time. Was there something about being a practice owner that was overwhelming? Because I think that your experience can help shed some light on other young women who might be thinking about buying a practice. And, I don't think that there's any right or wrong reason. It's whatever is best for you personally. And obviously you made a great choice for yourself, which I highly applaud. But in the hopes of maybe saving somebody maybe the mistake of going through the purchase and then having to resell it down the road and maybe losing money, especially during COVID-19, we're all just trying to, get our bearings and readjust to whatever that new normal is going to be. But I just, I hope we can save somebody from making, an error or help them decide, one way or the other.
Absolutely. And so, what I would say is, I guess for starters, the years that I did own a practice, they were very difficult and I did find them quite stressful. And now looking back, I'm very fortunate that I've had that experience because of everything that I've learned and how much I've been able to grow. But in the moment, I did find it very, very difficult managing employees and ultimately being responsible for everything that happened in the practice. So I didn't have a lot of support as far as really learning the ropes of managing a practice and knowing how to problem solve at every step of the way. And so I think that is really probably the biggest thing that I would say to somebody that is coming out of school interested in buying a practice or starting a practice. I think having good support in place and mentorship specifically for the business things is really, really critical. And then, of course, as a female, I did feel very torn as far as being able to, devote the appropriate amount of time to my family versus the practice. And the practice realistically is like another child. So it needs, especially in the early stages, is like a newborn. It needs quite a lot of time and attention. And, especially as dentists, we are perfectionists. We don't want anything that we put out to be anything less than perfect. And, any patient you work on, certainly they will go back into their communities and their families and will talk about the experience they had in your office. So I was very meticulous as far as from the very beginning to the end of the full patient experience. I wanted patients to have just the best experience. And so I think that also, contributed to the amount of time I was devoting and just a feeling of things perhaps being a little bit out of balance during that time.
That's great feedback. And I appreciate you being so honest about it, because I do think that we really need to know as women what we're getting into, because we do have that additional responsibility. Now, I do understand that men are stepping up to the plate more so now than any other time in history to co-parent our children. But I do think that, the responsibility still feels and lands mostly on the female's lap. So that being said, we do have to be careful, if we have this strong calling to being a mom, that we realize that and recognize that ahead of time, because I had a little bit more of the opposite experience where I was concerned that I was a bad mom because I didn't want to be home all the time, and I didn't want I wanted to be working, and I wanted to have something that I could do, and I felt like I was a much better mom to my daughter because I was doing those things and not at home all the time. So I think that no matter whatever's right for you is what's right for you. And we do not in any way, shape, or form, mean to be judgmental at all. That's not the point here. The point is that everyone has to realize what's best for them.
Absolutely. And also just knowing that each stage of the process is really a learning process and an opportunity to really grow, not just professionally, but personally.
Absolutely. I want to go back to something that you mentioned, which is something that I'm very passionate about, because, having gone to dental school and made a lot of mistakes in my practice, started it from scratch, and grew it. But it took a long time. Those initial, 7 years were really, really difficult. And, there were many times where there wasn't enough money at the end of the week to pay the staff, and never mind me. Those were challenging. And that, to me, is a weakness in our curriculum, to say it gently, that we didn't get enough background in business. I think that we needed much more education. And one of the reasons why I went back to Tufts is because I finished my MBA and wanted to give back to the students and help to support that side of things. Now, I think we're doing a much better job today than we have ever done in the past, where we have a course that is very involved and given by a CPA who understands the mechanics of the business side of dentistry. Whereas, when you and I were probably going to school, obviously I was much earlier than you, but when I was going to school, there was just nothing. They weren't spending any time on the business side of dentistry. I was feeling very fortunate that, at least I had years of experience as a hygienist, but, most people don't have that. At least I knew how an office ran. I didn't know all the little details, but at least I knew how it ran.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, what do you feel like was your most pressing issues in the beginning for your practice and things that made it uncomfortable?
You mean specifically for when I owned a practice?
Yes, for when you owned the practice.
Yeah. So, definitely in managing employees, I found to be a learning curve. And when I purchased the practice, for various circumstances, the prior owner was not in a position to stay. And so that also contributed to, feeling somewhat unsupported in the transition. And so the employees that were in the practice also chose to not stay. So, right from the beginning, it almost kind of felt like a startup recruiting employees. And then I would say that was probably the biggest part that I found challenging. Just, trying to make sure that they were properly trained and keeping them happy. And yes, I think that's probably the biggest thing.
Yeah, well, and it's one of the biggest financial burdens also on a practice is your staff and your employees. And if you get, one bad egg can ruin the bunch, right? So it's a difficult thing to get past. So now you're working as an associate, you're happy, you love it, you come and go as you please, and you've decided to start a second venture, from what I understand.
That's right. And so, what's interesting is, so a few years ago, I was feeling, while I owned the practice, I was feeling quite overwhelmed, and then came to the decision to sell the practice. And shortly thereafter, came to become aware of life coaching. And it was a female physician, a pediatrician actually, that I became familiar with her work. She's a pediatrician that does life and weight loss coaching for other practicing physicians. And after contacting her, I learned that she had received training and certification through the Life Coach School. And so one thing led to another, and I started to learn more about the process, and then decided to go through the training myself. And what's funny is that, sometimes I wonder whether I would have sold my practice or not if I had known about, some of these mindfulness techniques and approaches to living that I learned through becoming a certified life and weight loss coach myself. But really, the goal, this particular pediatrician is working with physicians specifically for weight loss. And I was listening to her podcast, and quickly I was learning that while she was talking about weight loss, in reality, what she was teaching her listeners was how to lead a mindful life and how to live each day deliberately, carefully thinking about how you want to experience life. And so I found that to just be so valuable. And then again, that was really, so to speak, like my gateway drug into mindfulness. So now I have, while I continue to practice endodontics and am very passionate about helping people to save their teeth, I am equally passionate about helping other dentists to lead a life where they feel like they're in the driver's seat, as opposed to letting life happen to them. I feel like so frequently, so many dentists feel like they're on a treadmill and they're stressed out and anxious. And even more so now with COVID, there's so many circumstances that are outside of our control. And it's easy to focus on the negative and not focus on all the good things that are actually happening in our lives and all the areas that we do have control over. So at this point, I have a passion to help other dentists to regain control of their lives. And then in turn, also I work with those that are interested in losing weight. As frequently when we are anxious or stressed out, many of us can turn to food or alcohol to make ourselves feel better.
It's so true. It's so true. I myself have struggled with both in my lifetime at various levels because of stress. And until you recognize that that's how you react to stress, you can't really improve on that. And fortunately, I have come to terms with that, and I have an understanding of that now, which has really been really freeing for me. So kudos to you, because there's so many of us out there that struggle with that. And it's been a lifelong habit. And until you become emotionally mature enough and open enough, I think, with your mindset, that you really struggle with it. And it's a downhill battle all the time.
Absolutely. And that was, one thing that I was noticing in my own life. I would come home from seeing, a very busy day of patients, and, perhaps it may have been a crazy day managing the employees, et cetera, or maybe an employee was out sick, for instance. And so what I found myself resorting to at the end of the day was really just comforting myself with food. And so even if I was not hungry, let's say it was after dinner, and I would just be having something else, some kind of a treat, something to help me feel better. And so, really, the first step, just kind of recognizing that that was going on, was a really powerful switch in my mind as far as becoming aware of my own actions, and how instead of actually just feeling my feelings, I was trying to avoid them.
Hmm. I know. Isn't that interesting how we do that? We don't like to be in that uncomfortable side of things and recognize that we're struggling, right?
Yes.
I think that that's the hardest thing to do is recognize the struggle and look at it head on.
Yes.
Good for you. That's great. So, how can people find you?
Yeah, so I maintain a video blog on Facebook. It is at Dr. Natanya, so that's Dr. Natanya. And then, of course, on my website, which is drnatanya.com, that's drnatanya.com.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah,
So, if anybody has any questions, they can reach you there, correct?
absolutely. Yes, I would be happy to be in touch with anybody.
Awesome. So I'm going to switch to some questions that I always ask my guests. And, one of the biggest things is a focus on confidence. And it certainly seems as though you've had confidence your entire life. So just going to ask, have you always been a confident young woman, or have you struggled a little bit, and have you gained it as time has gone on?
This is such a great question, Mary Jane. And I think this is such an important one to really think about. When we think about confidence, there's a distinction between confidence and self confidence. And so let me just kind of clarify a little bit. Confidence is something that we have, that we gain when we have experience doing something. I remember when I finished dental school, and the thought, at least at that time, was, if you go on to do a GPR, it will help you to gain confidence in your dental skills before you're out in a private practice scenario. So that's just one example. And so certainly the more and more procedures you do, the more confidence you gain in your ability. I'm very confident as an endodontist. I've done now thousands of root canal procedures. And so there's evidence to show that I am competent in this matter, and then I have confidence based on that. Self-confidence is actually pretty different. And it really, we can perhaps confuse the two occasionally, but let me define self-confidence. So self-confidence really comes more from having your own back and believing and trusting in yourself to be a problem solver and to not beat yourself up when you make mistakes. And so I believe that it's absolutely normal for all of us on our journeys to make all sorts of mistakes. That's why they call it practicing. No matter how long you've been out in practice, you're not always going to be perfect, right? And, I've been a dentist for 15 years, and there's still plenty for me to learn. There's plenty for each of us to learn. And so then my self-confidence needs to come from a place of knowing with conviction that I will make mistakes, and that I will learn from my mistakes, and that I will not allow my brain to go to a negative place when I fall down or when I don't do my best quality work, for example. So how we choose to handle those situations and learn and grow personally and professionally, I really think that's where the self-confidence piece comes from. And again, I've been really fortunate to have some awesome mentors. I don't know that that mindset or that definition of self-confidence would have been something that I would have clearly articulated, when I started dental school. But I think having, really strong female mentors to look up to has certainly been helpful. And then, of course, family and peers around me now.
Absolutely. And experience is a great teacher, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, experience is a great teacher. What one piece of advice have you received that has been really instrumental for you in your lifetime?
I think probably the biggest one was when my sister recommended that I consider going into dental school. Otherwise, I would say mostly when I talk to people that are much further along in their career, and they remind me just how really we should approach each day as a gift, as opposed to, sometimes we take everything so seriously and we're so concerned how different things may have long lasting impacts. And so I really try to keep everything in perspective. And I ask myself, is this situation that I'm in and the concerns that I'm facing right now, will this matter to me tomorrow? Will it matter to me in 1 week? Will it matter to me in a month or in a year? And so, certainly, yes, sometimes there will be things that do concern or have repercussions down the line, but it really helps to kind of bring into perspective and keep the spirit of kind of, not taking everything so seriously.
Oh my gosh, that's really good advice. I really think you're absolutely spot on with that because life is too short and to crumble over an event, one event. I was recently reading a book and failure is just learning how not to do something. It's not a big deal. It's not the end of your life. It's not, failures are just learning experiences. And if we look at it that way, it's so much easier to understand than if we think, oh my gosh, the world is coming to an end.
Absolutely. And something else that you just reminded me of is the book Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert.
I
And
love that book.
it's really such an inspirational book.
It sure is.
One of the things that left such an impression on me was that, as we embark on anything in our lives, we're going on a journey, and it's similar to a road trip, right? And so it's absolutely natural to have fears and doubts, and they're along for the ride whether you like it or not. Everyone has fears and doubts and uncertainties. And so then really the question isn't how can I get rid of all of my fears and doubts, but rather how much power and authority am I going to give to these fears and doubts? They're going to be along for the ride. Do I want them in the back seat, or do I want them, actually holding
Driving.
the driver? Right. So that was a really powerful thing for me to ponder on, because it gives me reassurance to know that, all of us have fears and doubts and uncertainties. Now, when you look at our lives in COVID, perhaps we all had the illusion that everything in our lives was perfectly planned and everything was going to be falling into place as we expected. But if we really think about it, there's quite a lot that's outside of our control, even before COVID, right? So COVID makes us remember that there's a lot that's outside of our control. And yet, even still, there's plenty that we can focus on, that we can control. We can always control our experience of what we're going through and the attitude that we bring and how we show up to each situation.
Absolutely. Well said. Absolutely well said. Who has made the biggest impact on your life?
Oh, well, this is where I would have to say thank you to my parents, because without their sacrifices and without their constant support, I know I wouldn't be where I am today. So they always prioritized, education. Both of my parents are educators. And so I know they were constantly striving for me to achieve as much as I was open to. So.
Very good. Very good. Now, have there been any obstacles in your life that you've overcome that you want to share with the audience?
Absolutely. So I touched on it briefly. When my husband and I moved out to San Francisco in 2009, as I mentioned, the economy wasn't great. And so I was in a position where, or we were both of us in a position where we had to do whatever it took to make it work. And we didn't have children at the time, but we were really committed to creating a life for ourselves in the city. And so, there were plenty of times that we could have said, maybe we need to throw in the towel and move elsewhere, because unfortunately the cost of living is quite high here in San Francisco. But I'm very happy that we stuck it out and we can call this place home. Both of our boys were born here. And at least as of now, even with a pandemic, we have no plans of moving.
That's awesome. Good for you. Who in dentistry inspires you? Is there any mentors or women or even men? I mean, it doesn't have to be a female.
Yes. Well, interestingly, yes. So Dr. Wilkins is a huge inspiration, as well as Dr. Athena Pappas. So I had the opportunity to work in her lab. I believe I might mess this up, but it may have been before dental school, like the summer before I started dental school. So this is so many years ago, I can't remember the specifics. But she was a wonderful mentor and really took me under her wing and really helped me feel supported and welcome at Tufts. She was one of the first people. During my years in dental school, I also remember there was an article in the Tufts Dental magazine that talked about the women in the dental school classes, like the percentage of women in the dental school classes. It was before I graduated in 2005, so maybe 2003 or 2004 when this came out. And they did a highlight on Dr. Wilkins, of course, and the number of women in her class versus the number of women in my class. And I believe in the year that I graduated, there were at least 50% of the class was female. And so that was such a big transition, wonderful transition. But yes, I was so fortunate to have some amazing, amazing instructors, and Dr. Rankin and Dr. Amato really influenced me positively to pursue endodontics. I'm very grateful for all the instructors that I had.
That's awesome. So just a little sidebar. Dr. Pappas is working on a testing mechanism that uses saliva and is extremely accurate. So we're trying to support her and get that off the ground so that not only can we test ourselves, but test patients on a regular basis. So she is, one of my favorite people, and we share that in common. I also worked for her as a hygienist when I was in school in her lab. So she holds a very special place in my heart as well.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
So tell us one thing that people would be surprised to know about you.
Well, this is actually a pretty funny non-dental related one, but I almost went into the Hollywood business as a kid. When I was about 11, I was actually in a movie with Forrest Whitaker. So for I think it was about 2 or 3 days, we filmed the movie. They were looking specifically for, I was in the movie with my mom, and they were looking for a middle-aged woman and a daughter that spoke Spanish, and we fit the bill. And it was a fairly violent movie, and I actually never saw it because I was a kid, and I don't believe I've seen it as an adult. But they unfortunately ended up cutting our part out of the movie. But to this day, I will still get, like royalty checks from MGM. It's like maybe $10 every few years. It's very amusing to me.
I think that's awesome.
Yeah. It's really funny. And it actually sometimes reminds me of Dr. Rankin and his Mystic River.
The Mystic River, yes. I was just going to say, oh my gosh, you and Dr. Rankin must have gotten along so well because of your keen interest in movie making. I think that's the first thing he introduces himself. He tells you his name, and then, did you know I was a movie star?
That's right. Yeah. So endodontists in Hollywood. Little did you know that.
I didn't know there was going to be a correlation. That's awesome. That's
exactly.
So good. That's so good. Have you ever had any aha moments when you realized you were doing exactly what you were meant to do?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I will say, as an endodontist, it is extremely gratifying when you help a patient get them
Sure.
out of pain and they, are just so grateful every time that I have that situation and everything goes very nicely and the patient just feels so grateful to be out of pain is really a moment that I again feel truly fortunate to be an endodontist and a dentist, of course. And, in turn, now with life and weight loss coaching for dentists, it's really quite a special moment also when I help and enable people to be able to use their brain in a totally different way to see their situations from a totally different perspective. And it doesn't have anything to do with necessarily changing their circumstances, but just approaching it from a different way. And so that is also in turn can cause a series of aha moments in a different regard that is equally gratifying.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What's your favorite way to relieve stress? Because since that's something that you concentrate on, and we all have it, obviously, dentistry is full of stress, but what's your favorite way?
Yeah, so that's a great question. For starters, when it comes to stress, I think even just putting a name on it is helpful. So, if you think about any time you've been angry, if you've ever actually articulated the words "I am angry" when you're angry, you notice that it kind of diffuses the feeling. It's hard to really say, I'm angry when you're angry. And so, likewise, when I'm really stressed, I take a moment and create a pause to really feel what I'm experiencing. And so, with that in mind, I think there's plenty of activities that are helpful to reduce stress, but the goal is not necessarily to avoid the feeling, but rather to perhaps lighten the mood or to help my body feel relaxed as well. I love yoga and I'm an avid tennis player. So I like to engage in both of those pretty frequently every week.
That's great. Now, do you play with a league or anything now at this point?
Not currently in a league. I do play pretty frequently. So 3 to 4 times a week. I've been pretty consistent for about 7 or 8 years. And I have played in leagues before. Once coronavirus hit, that did kind of put a damper on things for a short period of time, but I haven't been back to league play since. But I do have a dream of, I have an unofficial goal of being the first 80-year-old lady to play at Wimbledon. So if that should happen, I will save you a front row seat.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm not so sure I might be around, but I do say that I'm going to live to 130. So I might just make it. That's awesome. Good for you. And I think that's the one thing that I think that many people don't realize is the importance of having goals, and even goals way beyond our working years and what people define generally as a lifetime, right? Because, for example, I can just tell you by observing my own mother, she should have died 10 or 15 years before she actually did. But in her mind, it was always, okay, what's the next family event that I have to get ready for? What am I going to make? What's the recipe? How can I do some of this stuff now so that I don't get tired? And she always focused on the next event. And it was never a question in her mind that she was not going to be there. It was just, okay, what am I going to do for this event? Right. So I think that we can control a lot of that ourselves with our mentality. And I call it my steel trap mindset, because it's just, you don't let anything in. You close your mind off to any alternatives, because quite honestly, we can do that. And you had mentioned it or alluded to it earlier. The mind is such a powerful thing. And I think so few people understand the importance of using your mind appropriately and the outcomes that you can get when you do.
Absolutely.
I do think that if people spent more time understanding that aspect, obviously it doesn't come with an owner's manual. And that's the saddest part, because it doesn't come with an owner's manual. And not too many people have been able to figure it all out. So that in and of itself is two major challenges that we have to overcome at some point.
Yes.
So how about a personal motto or a mantra that you live by?
Yeah. So, ever since actually probably high school, my motto was to trust and be grateful. So, just those three words,
Ah,
trust and be grateful. And so, when I think about really what that means to me, the first word, trust, I believe strongly that we need to trust that humanity has our back, that people are inherently good, that people inherently want to help you, and that the universe or God or higher power has your back. And also in turn to trust yourself, to trust your gut instinct, and to trust that no matter what situation you're in, even if you may perceive it as a negative one, you can learn from it and grow. And then in turn, to be grateful. I just think that no matter what you're going through in life, and again, even if it's something that you would consider negative, there's still so much to be grateful for. And that helps you to get into a positive headspace.
I think if we started out our day every day with what you're grateful for instead of focusing on what you don't have and what comparing yourself to John Schmo down the street, you know, we'd be so much further ahead. Gratitude is by far, I think, the most powerful medicine we can have.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
So, going back to your student days, I know a lot of, especially nowadays, students struggle with their student loan debt and the concerns they have about paying off that financial burden. Did you have student loan debt when you graduated?
I did, yes.
Was it a huge, huge weight on your shoulders, and have you been able to manage it pretty well? Just what I guess I'm looking for is I can say as many times as possible that don't worry about it because you are going to get there, that it's going to be fine, you will pay it off, I promise.
Yes.
As many times as I've said that concern doesn't seem to go away with the students. So just some feedback from your perspective would be great.
Yeah, that's great. So, I think graduates that are coming out of school now are like the debt that they're graduating now is so much higher than when I went through school. And yet, certainly when I finished school, we all felt that we were in over our heads. And I am very fortunate and blessed now. I've been out for 15 years and I recently just finished paying off my school loans. So I'm very, very grateful. But, I would say for anybody that's graduating, you need to just focus on being patient centered and oriented. The money will come. That's probably the
Absolutely.
biggest thing that I will say is that I'm very grateful that I was able to always keep patients first in that equation. I think that's the way it needs to be. Of course, there's a lot of different structures to how you work, either owning a practice or being an associate in a practice. And of course, financially, you need to pay your bills and be smart about your decisions. But as far as treatment planning, I would caution anybody that's a recent graduate, as long as you focus on what the patient needs and explaining everything carefully and really treating patients as you would want to be treated, the money will come. You will be
Absolutely.
able to pay off your loans. And that's really the biggest piece of advice I would say.
I agree. I keep telling them that it's going to be fine. And as long as they're smart financially from the get-go and really focus on getting that debt down and not buying every Louis Vuitton pocketbook and Louis Vuitton shoes that you feel like you need, you can do it, right? But when you're spending frivolously like that, at the time, if you have debt, the debt should come first and not the things that you feel like you absolutely can't live without. Those things you can live without. And the ease of having financial freedom is such a great, reassuring place to be that it's totally worth giving up all the frivolous stuff, I think.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Natanya, it has been just a pleasure getting to know you. I wish you the best with your new venture and, your practice and life out in San Francisco, one of my favorite cities. I love going to San Francisco just so I can go north and go to Napa. So when I go back again, I will probably call and say, hey, you want to have a glass of wine together?
Please do, Mary Jane. Thank you so much. This has been a real treat. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat.
It has been my pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to the Women in Dentistry podcast with Dr. MJ Hanlon. If you like our show and want to know more about us, check out our website, thewomenindentistry.com, or please leave us a review on iTunes. Join us for our next episode as we bring you another amazing woman leading the way for the next generation.